coming to my talk today. And I'd love to give a little bit of context to what I'm talking about. I'm talking about designing for a post-Silicon Valley world and designing for the world we want to live in. And as the nature of the talk is, we're starting to develop a philosophy that reflects a little bit of the practice that we've been working with to date, and particularly in the last, decade. But, I've been running the design studio now for 20 years, and I've found that this framing and worldview has been really useful for helping us understand how we can make more meaningful products, sort of helping give language to some of the things that our clients and designers know are true but struggle to articulate. But it's by no means a finished bit of work. We've sort of used the opportunity to give this talk to start to give some structure around it, but it's still very much a work in progress. And so I appreciate people coming on that journey with me. I'll just go into a little bit about myself. So I'm Andreu Simpson. I'm the design director here at Vert Design. As I said before, it's a design studio. We're based in Sydney, in Redfern, just outside of the CBD in Sydney. And the practice has been operating for 20 years. And I'm very lucky to employ a team of very talented industrial designers. So there's 15 people that make up the team at Vert Design, and we're all industrial designers. At Vert Design, design is about nudging the world into a better direction. We're driven to create a world we want to live in, one where design lends dignity to the human experience and is grounded in empathy and sustainability. Some of our core values are sustainability as an aspiration, progressive experimentation, people at the core, and growing opportunities. And I always think that sustainability as an aspiration is one I like to give a bit of qualification to. It's that the studio has been based in sustainable practice for many years, and as we develop new works, the goals of sustainability shift. And we never say it's a set and forget, it's always an evolving practice. As I said, I employ 15 industrial designers. I've had a period recently of growing the team, and I've had to think about what's the nature of the designers we want to employ and what's the nature of the best designers. And I think I've come up with these three clear ideas that designers are curious, they're optimistic, and they're willing to help. And things that are groups of three are always be cautious because they're neat and convenient. But I do think that if a designer is no longer curious, they're not looking to grow, they're lacking creativity, they're not exploring and trying to understand the world. If they're not optimistic, they're not producing the best version of things. We're not trying to deliver the best outcomes for clients or push the world into a better direction. And if they're not willing to help, that they're really not getting in the boat with the client or doing that great work we need. And I think these three characteristics make us particularly necessary in the current political and social climate that we have today, is that we need a sense of curiosity, we need optimism, and we need to get our sleeves rolled up and get in and help. And maybe another way I say this is that I'm discovering that there's very few people who can think of alternatives to the way in which we're currently living and operating. And I think that is the thing we really need today. We need to say, what are other ways in which we might operate as an economy, operate as a society, operate interpersonally, operate within context of the environment that are better alternatives to what we have. And that's going to take curiosity, optimism, and a willingness to roll up your sleeves. I think designers are particularly well placed to do this work. So, as I said, it's not fully resolved, the thinking we're doing on this, but I've tried to bring in a bunch of things that we've done over the years to help give a clear demonstration of how the worldviews in which we hold affect the work in which we produce and how we might scrutinise and understand better our worldviews. So just above the idea of a worldview, I've included this diagram which talks about the ways we might think about how we operate. And so I call it the legal, the ethical and the moral. And so the legal goes at the core of what we do. Legally, we have a responsibility to our clients. We're taken on a contract. We have to deliver a quality of work, do what we say we're going to do based on the contracts, our legal requirements. And outside of the legal exists the ethical. And the ethical I think of as the rules in which bind our industry. So ethically, we would never approach another designer's client, or ethically, we think about the sustainable impact of our products. And ethically, we charge a fair rate for our work. There's the ethical bounds of the rules of our industry. And then outside of that is the moral, and the moral are our own personal beliefs, and they sit at a level outside of the ethical. And morality might be the way in which we treat the relationships that our clients have between themselves, or morally, it might be what sort of end product do we want to produce, and how does that better benefit the pressures of people in society. They're hard to discuss. The legal's easy, the ethical's a bit harder, and the moral's harder again. And so that are the ways in which we behave. And we filter all of our work through our worldview. And so all of us, and the studio as a whole, and each of the individuals hold a worldview. It's how we see the nature of relationships and the world at large. Is it seen as a theatre for contest and dog eat dog, or is it seen as people having fundamental positive traits that are only looking to be fostered? And worldviews are hard to discuss, but we have a worldview, and that worldview affects how we do our design intervention. So a client brings us a problem, or we discover our own problem. We produce a design intervention which creates our product-based solutions, but sitting above that is our worldview. And I'm worried that this may seem particularly obvious, but I think to go in and start to scrutinise it gives us the ability to reflect and think about how our worldviews shape what we're doing. In terms of how we experience our design process as industrial designers, I think we're always bridging these two key competencies that we have, and our work's always focused on these two attributes. On one side are the human factors, and on the other side are the technical requirements. And things that are human factors are users' needs and behavioural patterns, things like positioning and an emotional response, the context of usage and the use scenarios, the environment and social structure which something's operating in. There's things like ergonomics, and then sensory and aesthetic experiences. These are the things that constitute the human side of it. And on the other side, we've got the technical requirements. It's physical properties, it's how things are made, what they're made from. It's the engineering detail and the manufacturing documentation, these really hard skills. And our process really pendulums between the two. And I think this is particularly important for industrial design, that if we were just interested in human factors, we'd potentially be artists or marketers or much more in the soft skills. If we were just interested in technical requirements, would very much be engineers or technicians, and it's this ability to bridge both that gives this great opportunity to make meaningful change. And so I've been very proud of this next slide, which sort of explains a bit how I see this, this human and this technical operating within a business context. That I hear a lot of senior creative people tell me that they're in strategy, that they've been a graphic designer and they've evolved through their career, and now they're a brand strategist. And when I look at a lot of the work in which industrial designers do every day, I think it doesn't look like strategy. It's much more a client brings us a strategy, or we've been engaged at some problem level, and we're really producing the tactical bridge that allows the client to execute on that problem. And so, I think between the strategy and the tactics of these human factors, and between the tactics and the execution of these technical factors, I think it's a really powerful way in which we're able to make meaningful change, because we're bridging that gap. So the outcome of that is it allows us to produce this huge range of products. So if we look at this sort of screenshot from the website, we've got a 3D representation of an ant colony. We've got reusable, sustainable makeup pots for Mecca. We've got a furniture and infrastructure for the new Western Sydney Airport and the rail infrastructure. We've got charity projects for a food bank operating out of Sydney. We've got electric vehicle charging stations and things to prevent animal deaths on the roads, and a huge range of work. And all of them have these same commonalities. They're meaningful to people. They exist within some cultural context and have a user or someone that interacts with the core, and they're physically made. And it's those two pillars that allow us to do this huge range of work. That's really the easy bit of the talk. That's talking about myself and the work that we do. This harder bit is sort of talking about the post-Silicon Valley worldview. So to start with that, first of all, we're going to talk about what is Silicon Valley. And so Silicon Valley is a place. It's a place in California that exists in a nexus between some of the key universities in America and some of the key technical universities. And I think it's since no longer necessarily just a place. We could discuss it potentially as an idea or as a worldview. And I just want to talk a little bit about that worldview and our experience of it. So we've got this slide which talks about the development of telephones. This is, I don't feel like I'm that old, but this is a development that I've watched within my lifetime, from dial-up ring phones to early mobile phones to multimedia phones to internet browsing phones to the smartphones we have today. And I guess, if I look at this slide, I feel about an inevitable progress that, it's gone from the analog to the, and we can sort of see this, we go very much an analog system to an analog digital system to a digital interface to a digital and software system to a fully immersive software-based system. And it feels like a really inevitable transition that has produced a lot of development and good. And I wanted to talk about these three phases we see within Silicon Valley on reflection. And I've picked out these three quotes to help, I think, capture these points. And we could have put in a lot more. I hope it's not a straw man argument by picking these individual quotes, because we had many examples, but just for simplicity, I've got these three. So we had to say the first era of Silicon Valley was the countercultural era. And so I think that's characterised by Buckminster Fuller's quote here. We've got this image of the whole Earth catalogue. It was this first time that people had seen the entire Earth from space. And it was this really galvanising moment for people. And I just love the language in here. Buckminster Fuller says, "We are called to be the architects of the future, not its victims. There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. And the Earth is like a spaceship that didn't come with an operating manual." And I just love the humanist language. And if I think about this period of Silicon Valley, I think that it's mostly people and it's a little bit technology. And then if I go to the second era, we call the Steve Jobs era, and it's mass culture era of Silicon Valley. And this quote sums it up. It says, "One of the ways that I believe people express their appreciation to the rest of humanity is to make something wonderful and put it out there." And if I think about this period of Silicon Valley, I think about it being half technology, half people. And then back to that human mechanical attribute of our work, it seems like a really even balance. And then if we go to the next era of Silicon Valley, we're calling the oligarchy, tech bro oligarchy era. And this quote from Netflix sums it up really well. It says, "At Netflix, we're competing for our customers' time. So our competitors include Snapchat, YouTube, Sleep, etc." And it's an era where it's very little people and mostly technology. And I think by the time we get to this point where the forces of capital and the billionaires of the world are actively competing with people's sleep, I think we get a period where we say perhaps this Silicon Valley worldview no longer suits us. So where to from here? So I think that what we see out of Silicon Valley is a result of a worldview in which they hold, and a worldview in which seems so inevitable to them, it's not in any way scrutinised or understood to be a worldview in which they're producing goods from. So where to from here? Everyone approaches design through a worldview. Great designers are able to articulate, scrutinise and revise their own worldviews. I'd like to say, where does a worldview come from? And I think that our worldviews are informed by our outcomes. So I think we discussed in the studio often is that, first of all, we have an identity. We see ourselves in a particular way. The designer might see themselves as someone that speaks truth to power, or a Counturian, or someone that's obsessed with detail, or somebody that is able to be a force for good in the world. And that identity then affects our behaviour, and our behaviour becomes our rituals and how we approach things, and that behaviour will affect our outcomes, and those outcomes then inform our worldview, which then inform our environment, which then reinforce our identity. And so I think that at the beginning of how do we change our worldview comes down to how do we see ourselves. And so if we see ourselves as curious, optimistic, willing to help, and fundamentally agents that have the ability and moral authority to make the world a better place, we're going to be able to affect our worldviews that way. Design has the power to reimagine and create the world we want to live in. This quote is a statement that I believe, but it's also something that I've had to question a number of times over the years. When I was a young graduate, I was taught that design had the ability to change behaviour. But then as I developed products and put them out into the world, I noticed that they didn't necessarily change behaviour. And I think a great analogy for this is, personally, I often want to improve my drawing practice, and periodically I'll buy a nice sketchbook and a better pencil, and the sketchbook and the pencil will encourage me to do better drawings. Then they become talisman that change my behaviour. But if I had no intention of doing better drawings, the book and the pen have no effect. So maybe we can say that design can change behaviour for those that already want to make change. But in this statement of design has the power to reimagine and create the world we want to live in, I think it becomes very much the moral responsibility of design to imagine a better world. And just to use a little analogy, I did some lecturing at some Sydney universities, and we ran a project on possible, probable, and preferable futures. And what we found is that all of the students, when asked to imagine scenarios into the future, all imagined dystopias. So in every scenario, the air was unbreathable, people lived in shoebox apartments, there was climate catastrophe, and out of the hundreds of students that I ran, not a single student imagined a world that was better. And I understand why. It's dystopian futures are more interesting. Design has more ability to solve problems within these futures. It's easier to imagine a respirator than it is to imagine what might be necessary in a world that's been improved. But also I was very much aware of the danger of it and the concept of target fixation, that we end up heading to the things in which we focus on. And it's clearly design's role to imagine these better worlds. All right, so I just want to talk quickly about the wonderful little suitcase company. This was a very small project we did some work on a few years ago, and it came through a wonderful client of ours who was a speech therapist, and she had children presenting to her with delayed speech. And when she started to work with them and do therapy to help improve their speech, she discovered that they hadn't developed a lot of the fine motor skills and the tactile development that was the groundwork to create functioning speech. So what this is, it's a little suitcase that has a bunch of traditional games within it, school objects that kids can move around and a whole range of different textures and surfaces. It's also a little suitcase, so it's contained, it's kid-sized, it can be taken out to hairdressers' appointments and restaurants and cafes, and it gives the child a focus point of entertainment, but also the convenience and comfort to the parent of something that contains the play. And so I'll just go into how we thought about speech, is that how I think about speech as a flower, that it's the fruit or the result that comes at the top, but to have a flower you first of all need a healthy plant, and the healthy plant's got good soil and a root system and a stem and it's got petals and it's thriving, and then a flower comes from it. And I think that's the good way to think about how speech occurs. You first of all have to have learned fine motor skill, you have to develop an internal monologue, you have to have had a range of interactions and tested it out before then that function's available. And so that's what the Wonderful Little Suitcase company did. It got kids off tablets, basically. So the reason that kids weren't developing these fine motor skills is that a lot of their play was on a smartphone or a tablet, and their very fast nature didn't invite play from other people and delayed their development. So I've sort of broken this down, and I think it's could be overstating the point a bit, but just to say, not unlike sustainability as an aspiration, as products are developed and solutions exist, they can then become a problem that then need to be worked on. So I would say that the original problem was, the original worldview of the Silicon Valley and the Steve Jobs era was technology has the unlimited potential, computers are the bicycle of the mind, and that's the worldview. So when a problem comes along, the design intervention becomes, how can we navigate the web with ease on a device that feels like a slate of glass? And the product-based solution for that is the iPad. And as time progressed, we said screen time and smart media resulting in delayed speech for young children. And our worldview of this is improved tactility and physical storytelling in early childhood development is a right of humans and a better outcome. And so when we approach the design intervention with that idea, we end up with these very analog little suitcases. So I've got a couple of very quick examples here to say how our worldview's changed over time. So I've got Dresden Optics, which was a wonderful Sydney-based brand. I think they now have stores they're definitely around Australia, and I think a couple globally. They're a very functional glasses. And so when we started on this project, it came from this fantastic gentleman, Bruce Jeffries, who's a proper entrepreneur. He said, I think there's something wrong with the glasses business. It doesn't seem honest. And so we looked at it and said, well, Luxottica's worldview, who were the main market share, said that they provided individuality and luxury to the masses. And their view was, glasses are a form of individuality where we're wearing our brand on our face. And that's how we ended up with this very high cost and very brand-led glasses. And we said, okay, the problem is there's price gouging in eyewear and it's putting a price on good vision. And so we said our worldview was there's a comfort in uniformity, and that we can do universal design will create ease and remove the pressure of brand and fashion from an audience in the market that doesn't want it. And so when we approached it with that, we ended up with this idea of universal eyewear, where you can change the colour, but the frame styles remain the same, and it removed them as a direct fashion or status item. And the net result was a very sustainable, low-cost glasses, where we were selling a pack of 10 glasses for $200. And they've become a staple within Australia. So I've just got these periods of time within the studio in which we produce different glasses and how they sort of show an evolving worldview. So we started in glasses design with 3D printed glasses, And I think that was a desire, which I'm wearing today, that was a desire to make an understanding of a new technology. So, young designers, we were fascinated with the potential of new technology, and we're trying to make meaningful outcomes for it. And that resulted in these 3D printing glasses and mass customization. And Dresden was this view that potentially uniformity creates comfort, and that there's a value in the sameness. Our Good Citizen glasses that we did a few years later, we're looking at adaptive reuse, which has been a big part of the experimentation in the business. We go, how do we make meaningful the reuse of waste products? And so these were made from old Coke bottles and soda bottles, and so we've maintained some provenance in the material when we produce them. The next period of time is we did the Four Eyes glasses, and they were working with Papua New Guinean communities and being able to send ophthalmologists and optometrists out into remote areas to treat previously untreated eye conditions. And so it was really a co-design practice. And the fifth period I put in here is another adaptive reuse project we're doing, where we're making sunglasses from waste product of glasses production and glasses repair. But it also has the added element of I'm working in conjunction with another design studio. And I think this idea of community of practice and open relationship between other design studios, combined with what we know about adaptive reuse and complexity, shows another period of a changing worldview in the studio. I've just got some images that show these different glasses styles. And just because I am an industrial designer, one of the great things about these has been the ability for us to generate novel hinges for each of these clients, which is a reasonably complex task. So I really think we've made the point that we need to be thinking about how that worldview plays into the work in which we do, and it's important to acknowledge that where we've gotten to with a Silicon Valley worldview no longer suits the problems that we have in society. And I think it's time that we reevaluate what a post-Silicon Valley worldview might look like. And so just to get us started, I said I'm not finalised on it yet. So if we said a Silicon Valley worldview might be characterised by the idea of move fast and break things, it could be talking about, and the opposite of move fast and break things might be shifting from the individual to community power. And if Silicon Valley is interested in daily active users, we might say the opposite is the understanding that people are very sensitive in a range of unique ways. The Silicon Valley worldview was very interested in convenience and efficiency. And a post-Silicon Valley worldview might understand that the human condition is fragile and complex, and we have interconnected relationships between communities. So, as I was saying, it's not something that I've completely finalised. It's still a work in practice. I've used the ability to give this talk to start to build out and give language to these thoughts and practice that we've been doing in the studio for many years. And I guess it's also an invitation to say we can't do change or world building as individual designers or as studios. We really need to build a community of practice to have the authority to drive and maintain change. I'm a big follower of Dr. Cameron Tonkin-Wise, who's lectures at UTS here in Sydney, and he talks about the need for a conspiracy. And he says design studios and designers need to come together and conspire to make the change in which we need. And I really believe that's true. And I'd invite any other designers out there who are interested in a conspiracy to build a post-Silicon Valley worldview, that I'd love to reach out and connect with you. And you can find us through the website at vertdesign.com.au. Thank you.